because I
Okay.
thought about that a lot, and I was like, wait a second, how do I actually give some sort of metric to this as well? Hi, and welcome to the John and Random Show. Today's episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. And you probably, if you watch the show back to back to back, you're really tired of hearing me say that because I think I say it every single episode. So something different, but it just comes with the territory. But I am trying to explore a concept to turn into a book. And so one of the major concepts in the book is ideology, and kind of redefining it and looking at it almost more scientifically. We have tools like the political compass, which I think is a terrible tool for trying to figure out your underlying ideology. So I think this is very complex, and I think it's very good. And so I would really love for you to get into the comments of this episode and tell me where I'm wrong, tell me where we missed it, tell me what it needs to be added, so we can tweak it and get it better. And that is kind of the premise of this. And my two co-hosts today are Matt and Mark, my dad and brother, and they're going to kind of help me. Oh, I'm going to explain it to them. They kind of heard me talk about this a little bit, but not in this detail. So hopefully their feedback will be really good as well. And then we can all dive into this. So I'm going to kind of read these first couple paragraphs. Now, I typed these up pretty quick the other day, so just excuse the grammar, but just trying to get my concept out there just to kind of introduce the topic. So when you get into your car and turn on the music, if it sounds weird, the first thing you do is adjust those settings, the little dials to conform to your preferences. And this is how I'm thinking about the political ideologies. We kind of come with factory settings in a car, depending on the type of car, how it's set. And that we get those, our ideology based on how we were raised, things that we learn over time, some reactions to certain things help us set our preferences as we go through life. So your political ideology can change based on circumstances. One could argue there's no right or wrong way to have your settings, and that's part of the reason why I wrote this, or will be writing the book. Something may sound off, and actually be pretty similar. Just one dial is different, but underlying ideology is very similar. So just being able to appreciate those things, and get some unity. Let's see, kind of lost my place here. The song you play, the issue will be listened to and interpreted by your ears based on how you set your dials. The closer your settings are, the more unity, and the more we appreciate how someone else listens to their music, the more tolerance we can have of their ideology, right? So if you kind of understand it, may be able to have a little bit more appreciation. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish here. A little helpful history up front. So this would not be a book focused on history, but you need some context. We get to go through Hammurabi, Moses, Greek, Romans, the significance of the Treaty of Westphalia, the House of Burgesses, the Renaissance thinkers, and that would be a great book and important to trace all those steps through political ideologies and how these systems came up over time. But the first place we need to start is to jump right to the French Revolution. There were members who sat on the left side of the chamber and members who sat on the right side of the chamber. And that became shorthand for what we know now, or the British kind of turned that into a shorthand in pre-American history. Those who sat on the left were those who wanted to just go ahead and overthrow the monarch and just completely tossed it out. And those who sat on the right were the ones who wanted to slowly shift away from the monarchy, but didn't want to necessarily have the revolution. Obviously, the left side of the house won in the French Revolution, and it was bloody, and it ended in a lot of
Change now.
change now, and it definitely was a change now. And so that's what happened. So you kind of had the two factions from a British and pre-American context was what both were kind of in favor of the revolution or changing the away from the monarch into a more parliamentary system, but and a more democratic system. But one was much more faster and one was more slower. So that was kind of like I said, those became shorthand. In America, you kind of had a similar response to that. You had the Federalists that wanted a responsive government. I mean, that wanted the slow, methodical change. That would be the Federalist, and the Anti-Federalist or Democratic Republicans that wanted a more responsive government. Those would be people like James Madison and excuse me, not Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and was one of the real champions of like the Anti-Federalist movement. And you had people like Madison and Adams, John Adams, that were more the Federalist side of the equation. That were more for a gradual change to a responsiveness to government. So this will go into the first dial. So there's going to be 4 dials, and I already put C illustration so we can kind of give you a glance of early American landscape. So, and I'll explain these dials here as we go along. So this first one, I've initialed it later on, LAG, or limited or authoritarian government. So this is one dial, right? This dial is going to, depending on what you set it. So, right, so a Federalist, an Anti-Federalist, or a Democratic Republican, and then a lot of the other people in American society, early American society, were much more sympathetic to like the monarch. They didn't have a lot of power, but I still wanted to represent what the ideology would be. So there's sort of 3 factions in early America. These 2 kind of had power and were setting the Constitution and doing all the things. The Federalists were much more for a sort of a republic, setting the country up as a republic where you have elected representatives, and the Democratic Republicans were much more for just a democracy. Well, we ended up with a Democratic Republic, right? So you have and we even furthermore federalized it out to the states, power out to the states. So you democratically elect representatives who were actually voted for by the electors, if you look at the Constitution and how it's set up. So it's very democratically elected representatives that were chosen by other representatives. So it's not super democratic, but it also is democratic. And then we farm out a lot of responsibility to the states because there's not a lot of trust in the government overall. So I think that's kind of what this represents right here on this dial. Then you have individuals and individual rights and revolts. So this would be a dial that measures your comfortability with government, so to speak. And it's how you respond to, or how you think the government should change quickly, or excuse me, not quickly, but should respond to outside forces. So in other words, if the government isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, should we
What recourse?
What recourse do we have as citizens? So we built into the amendments, the First Amendment, we have the protecting the right, the freedom of speech. This is a very American sort of concept. And also the Second Amendment, and that is I can't remember which founder it was or who it was that actually said we should have the right to revolt. The Second Amendment is sort of the right to revolt. The first one is the right, freedom of speech. The second one is the right to revolt. So that's kind of where I borrowed a little bit of that. You had both the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, or the Democratic Republicans, were very libertarian on this idea of, and this sort of, let me explain this a little bit more. So your monarch would be like, the people don't have any right because you have a divine right to rule, right? Nobody elected you, nobody can overthrow you. It was seen as immoral for a commoner to overthrow the king. So this would be, if you hold that belief, then you would be down here at this 0 mark, or the 1. I'd call that a 1. A statist approach would be the state has all the authority, and the people, yes, it's not like God gave us the right. We were elected, but we were duly elected to run the state. And so you better just, back up and not, do anything. Where a republic obviously is much more, you're supposed to be representing, the people. That's the idea of it. You still want to be a little bit responsive. Democracy would be like pure, like middle line, like a 5 out of 10. Just dead center, like a neutral. You could be voted in or you can vote out. It's just up to the whims of the people. Libertarian is much more quick turnaround. Every single day you should be thinking about what the people want, not thinking about your own interest, not be thinking about anything. You should be completely devoted to the will of the people, and not to your reelection necessarily. And I think that's how most of the founding fathers looked at how they should be approaching their elected positions, right? And then anarchy would be 0 or like 10, dialed all the way up. That like government doesn't exist, it's not legitimate. No one has the right to be king. We're all, kind of how it sounds, anarchy, right? So self-explanatory. On this one, it's the same but reversed, right? So the limited government, right? So if you believe in no government, it's going to be 0 or 1. If you want a little bit of government, or you feel like you can tolerate a little bit, but it should be as minimal as possible, right? Democracy is like that 50-50. You should have government, and you're okay with government as long as it's elected by the people, for the people, whatever. And the republic, obviously, you want those people that you elected to think and have the experience and put their experience, so that you don't have to, as a citizen, worry about what the person is doing. They should be doing their job, right? So it's a little bit more trust in government. It's more institutional, trust in the institution, right? So the Federalists kind of had that more approach, where the Democratic Republicans early on had very little faith in that, and just wanted more of a pure democracy, right? And then these would be, like I said, people that more favored the rule of King George, and they were just in a colony and they viewed it as their colonies and we shouldn't revolt, So, right. So those people would have, a more statist approach, or almost monarchy, but, maybe give them a little bit of slack, since they're in America, right? They want a little bit of distance, right? They don't want to completely, yeah. Okay. So now we get to foreign relations, right? So this would be a measure of, and you can kind of see the options here. So you have globalists is kind of like citizens of the world, open borders. You should be pretty much free. Anybody can live and should be able to live wherever they want to live. You're just completely neutral. You don't really have an opinion. People can do what they want to do as long as they pretty much leave you alone. Protectionist would be everybody can do what they want to do, as long as they leave you alone, and they should leave you alone. Kind of just like, that's like, shouldn't have any of the mixing there. Isolationist is we should have policies in place that actually deter, you know,
Us going to war.
us going to war, trade involvements, foreign entanglements, all that kind of stuff. And I think that most of the founding fathers, and probably everyone in the United States, were pretty much would fall into this camp here. So, and then you have social contract.
Ironically, that is the thing that most Americans agreed on until, I would say, maybe the 20s.
Yeah, exactly. So
as far as isolationist,
yeah, to some degree. So I mean, obviously we were expansionist, but we wanted it to be us, and but there was still the idea that we would protect our own area, but we're not going to we're going to try to stay out of treaties that are going to draw us into war. We're not going to be buddy with France and then end up in the trenches in World War One.
Right, and one of the exceptions to that, of course, was with the
War of 1812.
Marines from the halls of Montezuma, the shores of Tripoli.
Yeah, but these were all very small campaigns that were really not authorized by anybody but the president, and didn't get a lot of press. Most Americans were not really aware that we were meddling as much as we were
in the Mediterranean, right?
Right, fighting Muslims in the Mediterranean, or taking over Hawaii, or all these different things that we did.
Well,
Opening up Japan to trade,
tried to
that came back
actually
to bite us.
represent that here is you had the Federalists, and I think it was, I can't remember which president was Adams or whoever was right after him, that kind of did those a little bit of foreign entanglements. I think the whole disposition of the early American landscape was fairly protectionist, where the Democratic Republicans and Jefferson hated that move and were very anti,
Yeah.
entanglement. I think that's what
and
that's trying to represent.
right. And by law, that's where we were at. And we kind of fudged a little bit by the Louisiana Territory. It wasn't really legal.
And you even have the Alien Sedition Act. I mean, obviously, all of these guys were kind of in this very low, low on this dial, I would say.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's good to historically look at some of the exceptions to that and why, and the difficulty of that position. As well. I think fewer people are historically knowledgeable about that and some of the exceptions, and that's why I think we brought it up.
Oh, that was helpful. That was valuable. I think in the back of my mind, I've kind of gone through a lot of this stuff and sift through it. So sometimes it's just there. It just didn't come out in the presentation. So that's pretty good. Important to note. Yeah. I think helpful, to note. And then the social contract. Before I get too far into this one and explaining that, I think it's important to realize exactly what's going on here with these dials. This dial is what the government is supposed to be all about, right? How much power does the government have? And this is how much power do the people have, right? So this is the government's power, and this is the people power. What do you think that the government should be doing? What do you think the people should be doing? What should we be doing with our neighbors, right? How should our government interact with our neighbors? And how should we be involved? And this one is, what does the government actually do, right? So this is what it is. This is what we are. This is what neighbors are. And this is what the government does day to day, right? What is your disposition, or how do you feel that things should be done, right? So the government, they were obviously pretty low across the board, except for maybe, some of the, more monarchical. I don't know if that's the right word or not.
Tory.
Yeah. Well, let me explain these first before I get too far into this. So you have the government, everything is privatized. So there is no government doing anything. The militias are all self-regulated. There's no federal or state governments. There's no roads or bridges. There's nothing done, policing, this would just
Wild West.
Yeah, anarchy type, thing. That would be like a one on this scale, right? Essential functions would be like police, military, and that's about it. Then you have core functions would be like maybe a post office, maybe the Fed, a bank, a central bank, maybe some core economic things. And so you kind of have the Federalist who, and really embodied by Madison, and the Federalist Papers, and he was in favor of the central bank. So that's why he kind of goes to this core principles. And I think the Democratic Republicans were much more skeptical of government in general, and wanted to keep it basically just to the essentials. Core plus would be like taxation for teas and what it would be like in favor of, these would be the people in the Tea Party, and these are people that are against the Tea Party and wouldn't have participated in that type thing. So that's kind of what
funny.
This dial.
The Democratic Republicans were more Tea Party as far as how the government should function than that's blowing my mind, because you think the Democratic Republicans are the Democrats of today, but they're not even close.
Well, they're leftists. That's another thing that's important to realize. These people would be more right wing, and these would be more left wing. These would be more for slow and gradual change. We have the are going to write the laws today so that we can rule ourselves and the Constitution and throw the whole monarchy away, where these people were more for a gradual change. They wanted to go away from the monarchy, obviously, but, do it more gradually. So you have a skepticism towards all government, here with these founding fathers. So that's why a lot of times people say this might be called classical liberalism today, and or libertarian, but I think you see that there's both in here, and it's just not as simple as calling all of our founding fathers classical liberals, because there was diversity in the founding for sure here. And yeah,
I was thinking, as you go along, you're talking about early American landscape. I think as you get into the later history, I think the social contract will become clearer. What they agreed that the government should be involved as far as our private life. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it responsibility to our internal neighbors' needs?
So this is a comfortability factor. That's why I think about this. What is like the max and the minimum of comfortable, or what do you think would be the optimum government function, right? So should the government just handle the essentials? Should it just do core functions? Should it do core functions and help the poor, like Social Security, whatever? I think you'll see this bar creep up as we move through. So,
right.
But I think the issue, so this is ideology, right? So this isn't issue specific. We can look at the issues and the issues of the day, like we talked about the foreign affairs and everything, and the Fed being developed, and the Fed being developed here, and the War of 1812, and the Constitution and how it was structured, and the amendments here. These are really addressing each of these sort of like things and tackling it, but this is talking about the underlying ideology, your disposition or comfortability level, but with each concept. And so insert an issue, and I could find who is going to say what on here based on their ideology. So this is sort of mapping the underlying.
Before you go, I had a question about what you mean by privatized and why you chose that word, government privatized.
I really picked a poor word there. Thank you for pointing that out. When I said it earlier, it didn't make sense. It would be privatize. So I don't know why I chose that word. That is an awkward wording. So this would be anarchy, no government. Or government doesn't have the authority to do anything. Everything should be privatized. Maybe everything.
All privatized.
Well, is essential spelled right too while you're in there?
Hey, don't call me out on
I think it must.
Maybe it is. I mean,
I don't know.
Or it doesn't do any spell checking inside this graph.
It does. It has before anyway. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, in that case, let's let stand it is.
We will pretend that it's spelled right. How about that?
Okay.
Okay.
How about that?
So let's go.
This is different.
Modern American. Okay. This would be as I see it. So this is kind of my opinion. You guys feel free to disagree with this, but let me explain the whole thing before you start casting stones.
Dude, I can't understand this. Is it? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, these should all be the same except for where we change this word over here. So let's go ahead. All. All right. So all this should be the same as far as like this, right? The metrics that we're using. So L is libertarian, right?
Republican, Democrat.
Libertarians are very libertarian in their approach to government. Okay.
Really?
Republicans tend to be fairly trusting as far as what the government should do, right? And let me quantify this, because you might say, well, we're very anti government, right? So that would be the libertarian wing within the Republican Party. The Republican Party actually is very comfortable with the electors. We wouldn't have won a popular vote as a Republican in how many elections. We have it set up, and we like the constitutional approach. We like how it's set up as a democratic. It's a republic. These are representatives that we're sending. These are smart people that we're sending up there. There's a comfort level that Republicans have with the way that the government was founded and are content to use it. Democrats tend to be a lot more skeptical. They tend to be wanting a pure democracy. Just from an electoral position, they would have won more elections had it just sort of been straight democratically elected, majoritarian positions. So that's kind of where they get it. Then you have the Democratic Socialist, who are very much comfortable with the government doing everything. So that's kind of how you break this tier down. Now, I think
I
this
totally read that Satanism too.
Satanism. Oh, the
statism.
Oh yeah. Maybe I should have said statist.
Sure.
Statism. Anyway, whatever.
Then they're Satanists. But anyways.
But a lot of times when a Democrat is mad at when a Democrat's mad at a Republican, they're going to call him a libertarian. And when a Republican's mad at a Democrat, they're going to call him a socialist. And or they're Democrats going to call it.
They're going to frame their argument as being libertarian.
The argument as the most extremes of each. When most of the time in reality, you see how a Republican is higher than a Democrat on this metric. So it gets weird. It gets wonky. And I think this somewhat explains some of the conversations that we have in our modern society about the name calling. I think this is a pretty good summation of that, if you will.
Yep.
Individual rights and revolts. Obviously, libertarians are all about, less power in the government, the responsibility of the individual. The Republicans are as well, but I think that there's more of a neutrality to it. Not that they're neutral on the topic. I just think that that is where a lot of people in the Republican Party land.
They just don't want to jump the gun, literally.
Democrats would be more in favor of the government doing things to control things like gun control, things like that. Would be more willing to put more power in the government and less in our hands, and we hand that off. And then Democratic Socialist obviously falls into the statist category there. So I think that's fairly self-explanatory. And I think these, as they go up, these go down. Obviously, these are somewhat mirror images of each other because they encapsulate a lot of similar ideas. But I think you can be, the reason why they're separated out is I think you can personally be a Democrat and be very high over here and low over here. I think you can have different positions in these categories and not be contradicting. Whereas if you were to do something like the political compass, it would try to pigeonhole you into one of these, and it might land you in the wrong place.
What makes somebody a Republican or a Democrat? What makes people identify as one or the other? I mean, other than the fact that these are the only categories that really exist for most people, how would you say that somebody is one or is the other? What's the thought process that leads somebody to be that?
I think I'm going there. I'm taking a long time to get there, but just trust me, I'm going there. Because I think that's very much a point of this whole thing is I think it's so hard. What do I call myself? And most people in America call themselves independent. Like, I'd say probably a good 40% of Americans will call themselves independent. Well, 30% might call themselves, Democrat, 30% might call themselves Republicans, but 40% would identify as independent. But if you broke down their actual ideology, they'd fall into these camps. They would just fall into the Republican camp here, a Democrat camp here, a socialist camp here, and a libertarian camp here. Well, what do you call that person? Like, what do you actually call that person? And we'll get there. We will get there.
Political mutts.
Yeah, exactly.
Inconsistent. No, I don't know.
Well, we'll get there.
But it's it's trying to pull out the nuanced view and what is at the foundation. Why are you more trusting of government? Are you wanting limited government? And some people who say I want limited government feel that way until they have a need, or somebody should do something about this, and they want the government to do something about their problem, but not your problem. So it gets it's very nuanced.
Yeah, but I think if you look at this, you kind of see their dispensation, right? I mean, their preference for who should be doing things and how it should be done, I think is pretty, I think it's covered in this. And I'll show you a little bit more why. But then we'll get to foreign relations. Obviously, libertarians tend to be a lot more isolationist. Republicans tend to be a little bit more protectionist. Democrats tend to be a lot more neutral. And Democratic Socialist tends to be a lot more open borders on that issue. Then you have the social contract. This is where we get into Republicans and libertarians tend to just say that we just want the essential functions covered, where Democrats want core plus being like Social Security, Medicare, things like that. Democrats pretty much want the government to operate a lot of things. Notice how I didn't say Democratic Socialists want government owned things. I don't think there are many Democratic Socialists in America that actually want the government to own the means of production. And I think that that's a distinction.
Bernie Sanders, right?
Republicans and Democratic Socialist versus a pure socialist. So,
well, does Bernie Sanders actually want the means of production to be owned?
No, he doesn't. Though? That's why he's a Democratic Socialist. He wants it government operated, not government owned. That's why he's Democratic Socialist instead of just a socialist. That's why. That's what he would say about himself, right? So, let's, before we get into modern Republicans and Democrats real quick, let's go here systems of government real quick. So you have what's the difference in ideology between a Nazi and a communist, and someone parliament government and authoritarian government or a dictator? Obviously this one, obviously they're statist. Authoritarian or a dictator would be like monarchy, is like, this is the dictator, is going to take, you have no, like we said, there's no right to revolt at all, right? Zero, boop, for authoritarian government. And parliament, this would be, so, when you're talking about systems of government of the world, this, America's closest to this parliamentary one, but this is, America's pretty unique, and we kind of covered that in America's founding, and you kind of see that there. So I didn't want to put that in here and just kind of muddy it up. So these are like democracies around the world, an average of the democracies around the world, the parliamentary systems: France, England, who knows whatever else ones there out there.
India.
Think of one. Yeah, India, exactly. Japan, whatever. So these parliamentary systems are, most of the time very democratic. Then when individual rights, they tend to, Nazis and communists tend to be very statist in that, individual rights is a principle of, these parliamentary systems or democracies around the world. And obviously, I think these are fairly self-explanatory. I think we get these. Foreign relations, here is where communists tend to be globalist, right? And worker-centric. And
actually, that varies by country, to be honest.
I don't know why Nazis has an L in it.
Yeah, and also it's not spelled right, but that's fine.
Oh, yeah.
We can fix that later.
Yeah. Oh, well. Don't draw attention to it. Don't look at it. So
it's not a word you write very often,
And it's hard to write up and down. I don't know why my brain doesn't, barely functions left to right. So up and down, it's just, yeah.
You're gonna have trouble with Japanese and Chinese.
Yeah. So this would be a major difference between Nazis and communists. Nazis tend to be very isolationist, very like super isolationist, internal, often thought of as racist because of that, because it's very much pure races, or so this is where the ideology maps itself. Most other than America, parliaments or democracies tend to be pretty open borders. You think of European Union, and all the democracies and around the world tend to be very open, very liberal on that spectrum, and authoritarians or dictators tend to be pretty protectionist.
The Nazis and fascists tended to be very protectionist, not
I was going to bump that one up too, to protectionist, because the Nazis were very much involved in. They weren't isolated. They were, they wanted peace, a piece of Poland, a piece of Hungary, a piece of
Finland.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they wanted a piece of the world.
Yeah.
And it has to do with nationalism.
Nationalism.
In a wrong sense. I mean, nationalism to love your country and things like that are
you're right.
Good things, but nationalism done poorly is, we're the best
that may
to an extreme, and then to protect that their stuff, their country,
my interests,
abroad. And then social contract, obviously, you have most of the time, and this, most of the time, authoritarian governments want to operate everything. Communists and Nazis want to own everything. And most of the
parliamentary systems
and democracies around the world. I really meant to change this to democracies before we got on here and going live, but whatever, too late.
I'm gonna say Nazis were socialist and not communist, so it's government operated, not necessarily government owned. I mean, I can be persuaded otherwise, but I would think that
I don't know enough about Nazis.
I believe that is true.
Yeah.
They did nationalize certain things, but they did try to just make sure that things ran for the most part. They didn't nationalize all the different automotive companies,
right?
But they made sure that they operated according to their dictates.
Gotcha.
Right. So they owned certain things, but allowed, they said they were socialist, but they also allowed people to reap benefits.
Right.
So there is that element of capitalism in there as well. So government operated probably fit better than government owned, per se.
I think,
interestingly, China is halfway between
China, right? There's a difference in here from China, and you might just make China its own, one, and compare that to other. You could make a block of each, a graph for China, for the USSR and Vietnam and Nazi Germany, and you could map them all out here, but I don't care so much about that. I just kind of was trying to big picture,
right, and give the tools to be able to do that with.
Exactly.
It's a really helpful rubric.
And it's one thing to look at just America and just like, wait, does this apply to every other ideology? And the point of this is to say it does. I think it does anyway. I think it maps on pretty well. And I don't think it leaves a whole lot out, because to me, this is what the government is. This is what it does. This is what the responsibilities of the people are. This is the, your neighbor relations with your neighbors and how you view that. So to me, that covers just about everything here and within these 4 dials. All right, so now we get to the fun stuff. Modern Democrats and modern Republicans. So let's start here with Republicans here. And I don't want you to look at these percentages yet, so I'm just going to pull this up. Okay.
Oh, man.
So, modern Republicans. So within all of these stay the same. Just want to point that out for, sometimes you open something, you're like, oh no, it's new stuff. This isn't new. This is basically what we've been talking about the whole time. But we're going to talk about the major camps or divisions within the Republican Party, right? And me being most of the time, growing up more in the Republican Party and knowing a lot more about it, I feel like this one is where I spent a lot of time debating myself and trying to figure out exactly what it is, but I landed in these spots, so maybe we can have some discussions along the way. That'd be pretty fun. So we'll start with with
limited or authoritarian government.
Yeah, but I'll explain. So I came up with rhinos as my. It's usually a pretty derogative term. I don't mean it derogatively in this graph. It's just more of an explainer. Just kind of like, I think when you say rhino, I think people pretty much know what you mean. They're sort of hawkish. They're what you might call socially liberal, economically conservative, right? So that's kind of where what this group is all about. And so they tend to be like, this is the economically conservative part, right? Very libertarian.
Ecocons. We'll call them ecocons.
They don't want the government doing very much, right? You don't want the government meddling or interfering in anything. Then you have social conservatives, which is much more of a traditional Republican thought process. If you think about it, they tend to be more kind of like founding father oriented, like this is how the republic, like I said, like when I talked about when we talked about the median average of Republicans, this is what I gave the whole Republican Party on this scale. But I think when you pull back the peels, the onions, and you dive into it, you have libertarians and rhinos and the populist, and that's what they would feel within this. So this would be how I would break that down.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the term rhino because when I think of a rhino, it's Republican in name only, meaning that they're actually Democrats. So are you saying that rhino in that place is the same as a Democrat? Is that where you would put a Democrat?
I would call this an establishment Republican.
Okay. Establishment Republican is different than
rhino.
Than a rhino.
To me, it's the same. And why can't I how do you spell establishment?
EST. Period.
That's true.
Good call.
Thank you.
That's where you go to your Word document with Grammarly on it and spell it and then cut and paste it.
I mean, yeah, but it's got to fit on a small thing. So I'm like, EST is plenty.
Yeah. I guess I've heard that establishment Republican, but when I think of a rhino, I think of someone still different. An establishment Republican, I think of as being somebody who's been in politics so long that they're not as grounded in the Republican views as they maybe once were, or as conservative.
Yeah.
So they've been, it's kind of like the frog in the kettle, kind of thing. It's slowly being heated. They have moved, and they haven't realized that how far they have moved.
And but dead frog Republican doesn't sound as good.
Well, to me, they're exactly the same thing. But if you're trying to be charitable, you call them establishment. They've just been there so long, they've just lost their way. If you're trying to be mean to them, you call them rhinos, Republican in name only. They're basically a Democrat. They are used interchangeably for as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I tend to think you're right, but I also see a little bit of nuance there, a little bit of degrees of difference. And I tend to look at those that are called rhino are very much Democrats. They're not even Republicans at all. I think establishment Republicans are still there, but as far as those values somewhat, they don't stand firm enough. I mean, they're generally Republican, but
Specifically, they don't stand on the social issues that Republicans do, and that's why.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
thing. Socially, they're not
So I think
Republicans, but as far as being as far as handling money and budgets and things along that line, they would be more I would say they're conservative monetarily, but liberal socially.
Right.
so I think it's
And
not so the this is I'm glad this came up early, right? In this conversation here. And I'm just gonna ask, let me explain the whole thing, and then we can go back and talk about how this maps on there, because I think when I get to the percentages next, it'll clear up a lot of what you're talking about. Because I
okay.
thought about that a lot, and I was like, wait a second, how do I actually give some sort of metric to this as well? And so I think I get to it, but maybe I don't, because some of the things you're bringing up is good, but I think it's important to, we're not talking about an issue here, right? So this isn't an issue specific. This is you're feeling towards a certain thing. So right,
An
so
outlook.
an outlook, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
A libertarian would have a very skeptical outlook on government's ability to do anything correctly, and shouldn't do anything. I think that this establishment person has kind of given up on democracy and republic, and by virtue of that is in the same disposition. So they get here differently, and they're different ideologically, but they're both end up in the same place functionally. At least that's how I think about it. And this populist is much more of a, is I would say just your average normie, almost maybe MAGA, person, that's, less inclined to be involved or care about about the nuance, like these people care about nuance, these two don't. you know your establishment, or your rhino or whatever, doesn't care about the nuance. They just feel like the government, this sort of cynicism towards the government here, and in here, and these people have that more trust. Let's go ahead and go to the percentages. That maybe we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so I said within the Republican Party, right, this equals 100%, right? Because it's got to account for everybody in this. So a rhino or establishment, about 15% of the Republican Party, the modern American Republican Party, I'd say 15% of people fall into this group. And 25%, a quarter of people that call themselves Republicans or identify ideologically as a Republican, 25% would fall into this category here. Libertarian, 40% would fall into this group, and 20% kind of over here in the Republican Party. Right?
Interesting. I'm not sure. I would debate between libertarian and social conservative if some of those points shouldn't go towards social conservatives, but I'm not certain about that anymore. I would say in the past it has been higher, and I'm not. I think this may be accurate for now.
I think that
because when I was younger, social
many
conservatives
people
were
in the
big.
Republican Party that are just so anti-institutionalist right now. These are kind of Trump people, really, in a lot of ways, ideologically. Very much in this camp. These are your Ron Pauls and your Rand Pauls. This is like the government can't do anything right. This is sort of Reagan. I'd say this is a Reagan influence, here.
Okay.
Almost.
Are you saying populist or social conservative?
Libertarian. I'm the government. I'm here to help. This is very cynical. These are Reagan, kind of This would be a more
Okay.
Reagan type thought process right here, right? And I think it explains that, where I think populists are a much higher, is sort of the normie Republicans that are more like, you know, I don't know. And the social cons would be more like your Mark Levin's, always talking about the Constitution, and the Republic and whatever. These fall more into this camp, and you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
put, your establishment Republicans or your libertarians in this camp. These
Mm-hmm.
are distinct ideological thoughts within the Republican Party. There's diversity here, is the point, of all of
Yeah.
this. And I think that this
I'd
should
be
be.
interested in knowing, and not right now, obviously, but where you'd put people like, DeSantis, Cruz, different people
Ooh,
that are
yeah.
running for electors. Um, the um, the guy that looks like he's from India, I can't even pronounce his name. Something with a V.
Vivek Ramaswamy. Oh goodness, I just messed it up. I don't. It didn't sound right when I said it in my head. It did.
Oh well, but
Vivek.
anyways, it'd be interesting to see where you place some of those people. But we can, now's not the time. But
No, no,
I,
no,
Yeah.
I
no.
like
Yeah,
I like the
but it's soon.
the breakdown and all.
This gives you,
The start
rather than just 4 different groups of people in the Republican Party, this gives you 16 different people in the Republican Party,
ideology.
ideologically speaking. Yeah, 16 different
Mhm.
variations in the Republican Party. Um, excuse me. Um, and you might almost say 8, but I can get into that later. But I'd say there's at least 4 big camps in the Republican Party, and there might be 8 distinct ideological views or variations within that. But I think it's easy to come up with 16. You could be up
Mhm.
here, you could be here, you could be up here and here, and that be not match anybody else in the Republican Party. But and it kind of comes down to what makes a Republican a Republican. A Republican or is this dispensation to want to. Do you think that the government should move quickly or fast? It's this left right that makes you Republican or Democrat. So there's always going to be 2 parties. One party is much more, we have the tools to accomplish all of these things right now. And because you could get the exact same ideological breakdown or profile and call yourself a Democrat and a Republican. You could have the exact same profile breakdown. That's amazing to me to think about, because I think it just says your dispensation and your ideologically, you feel this way about these certain categories, but you identify with this speed and quickness to get these things accomplished, or a conservative uh dispensation, which would be the right leaning, where,
Disposition, you mean?
yeah, I just,
Okay.
sorry, I'm getting a little off track. Let me try to get through this. So individual rights and revolts. I think the Republican Party is fairly unified. Populist, libertarian, social cons. Maybe establishments are a little bit a little bit more a little more trusting in the government. This would be, my personal role versus the government's role. So this would be, they'd be a little bit more comfortable with the government doing things.
How does that work with the limited governments on the left with them?
Say what?
They in their limited government, they're more libertarian, but then they're more trusting of the government on the next dial. How does that work together? Any idea?
Oh, this is more responsibility, individual responsibility, individual rights and revolts. So I think that if the government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, we should pull out the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and I should protest or, threaten the government, through the right to revolt, whatever, the Second Amendment.
Right to vote.
Right. Yeah, and right to vote them out,
Mhm.
This would be vote them out. This would be talk them to death, and this would be shoot them dead. I don't know. January 6th. Just kidding. People might not like that. I don't know. So anyway, all right. So foreign relations, right? So your your establishments are going to be tend to be wealthier individuals within the Republican Party, tend to be able to fly around on their jets, tend to be people more open borders. Social cons tend to be fairly neutral on this, and I think that has a lot to do with the religious influence of taking care of uh the foreigner and things like that. So there's some diversity.
Exactly.
I think you could be really strong in 1, 2, 3 categories and then low on this one and still mostly identify with the social conservative. You know what I mean? And call yourself that, because the emphasis on what you would vote on would be this issue over here. Individual rights or Second Amendment might be your bread and butter, and you might feel this way, but you don't care as much about it. It wouldn't be the issue that you necessarily vote on. Right. So then you have foreign relation. Libertarians tend to be pretty isolationist, and the populist con. Obviously, I did a lot of copying and pasting and changing and editing and moving and whatever. So just pardon the typos. And let's see. Then you have, so that's foreign relations. So now you have the social contract. I think establishments are a lot more, okay with the government. These might be your Republicans that would be okay with the government, running Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. A lot of times you have that kind of same thing within populist. Again,
isn't that on the same as Core Plus though?
What?
I thought that the establishment was really more for Core Plus. Like in my mind, government operated is basically socialism.
I think I moved that over, and I meant to do this. I think populists tend to be a lot more okay with Social Security, Medicare. Like these are kind of your union, pro-union, pro-Medicare, Republicans type thing. They would be okay with higher, government operating stuff. And of course libertarians are in here. So let's go down here to our, let me change this too.
And I would put social conservatives just down to core for the most part. Most social conservatives think that if you're doing the plus, it actually enables.
I think you're correct. I think I may have moved these around. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much the way I had it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. So here's an interesting thing. So right, individual rights and responsibilities, right? There's only about 10% of people that I think in the Republic. So you'll notice, right? The party, these still equal 100%, right? Because this is everybody in the Republican Party, but 10% have this feeling or fall into this camp, right? And 40% social conservatives and 40% of libertarians. So that means that there are 25% of people identify with this bar or would put themselves around here, and 40% of social conservatives would put themselves on this bar. Is that tracking? Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then the libertarians, 40% of so most of the party in the Republican Party would be right in here in this category, social con and libertarian. Social con and libertarian happen to be
libertarian on the right to revolt.
This is a bad example because they're the same. So 80% of the party pretty much is right here between and 40%.
I would say that's one of the big things that makes somebody a Republican is whether they identify with that. That's almost the primary indicator. But anyways.
Yeah, exactly. These two things, I mean, you're going to track with most of the party, right? To kind of like get you into these groups. So here's an interesting one. Foreign relations, 40% is of the party is right here. Open borders, comfortable with it. But the rest of the party is split equally, and it equals 60%. So 60% of the rest of the Republican Party are around here, somewhere in this general area.
Averaging out to protectionist.
So 60% of this averages out to protectionist.
Yeah.
And I think that explains a lot of why the Republican Party has a lot of confusion in it. You know?
Yeah.
And social 40% is in this libertarian basket, 20% are up here, 20% are in these, in between these two, kind of in that range. So to me, that explains the Republican Party, the entire Republican Party, and that distributes them where they are in there. And I think that you could, whatever you call yourself or however a rhino.
I think I'm 140% libertarian.
Yeah. That was just, don't look at that. It's grayed out.
Yep.
I just needed these to equal this, divide it by 4 to get me my 20%. So 20% of the party would be establishment, 26% would be social conservative, 30% libertarian, and 17% populist. And so when you get to people like, where's your Ted Cruz support come in, right? 26%. Trump was able to get these libertarians and populist, being, we don't care about abortion, we just care about the economy. Populist and libertarians, it doesn't think the government should be involved in those things. So he gets 30. He was able to capture these people. He was able to pull some of these, but he never really got these establishment guys. So that's how he was able to get the nomination. I see DeSantis as getting all these 26 easy social cons, but well, I'd say half of the social cons, because I think Trump won over a pretty, significant amount of them. And he gets 20% of, these establishments, and that gets him up to about 30%. So what's available for him? He's not really able to get any of these populists because his position is very much down here. I'd say maps a DeSantis. I would say he maps up here, social con. I think he would map social con, and then foreign relations. I might give him a populist or protection, is kind of grade on that. I'd put him in that group here. But and then social contract, I put him down his libertarian, wing of the party, which means that social conservative libertarian. So he agrees with 40% of the party there. That's why he's a pretty strong candidate. But he's got to get what I give him. I gave him populist on the protectionist. So I think there's a way to statistically view his floor and his ceiling. I
was about to say, if he can win what he's got available, he can win.
Exactly. But I think Trump has a pretty strong lock on a lot of these. He was able to lock down. He got establishments to, join him at the end.
Which was crazy
with the Supreme Court pick. That's what his instincts, Trump's instincts, I think, is what carried his way to the nomination, because I think he had the populist in the corner. He was able to get those libertarians on board with his economic, picture, right. Even though they might not agree with him on some things, he didn't talk or focus on those certain things, in order to not turn them off. So, I mean, he was a smart player. I mean, he played the field in a way that gave him maximum amount from the different sections that were available to him, but yeah, now that I've explained it, and I know I kind of tried to defer that original sort of questions that were coming at me to the end. Did I cover them? Are there new things? Are there different things? Or how are we thinking about this?
No, I mean, I think the answer to my question really was good luck. So my question was, how does somebody tell if they are Republican, Democrat, libertarian, or whatever? And really, the thing about it is each person is nuanced, and they may be able to figure out where they are on this dial and how many other people are roughly with them on these dials, and that would be helpful. But as far as being able to tell, to give yourself a label, it almost is not as helpful as you would think. Exactly.
I think that's the biggest takeaway I have come up with is it's not helpful. And I think that it's really hard to tell because you might find your dial and figure out where you are, and you might come up with close to where you were, but you might differentiate, you might find yourself in a different place on another thing. And I think that's important to be okay, because going back to the music illustration, you get in and you want the music to be set to the thing that you're most comfortable with, and so you want to vote for people that you most comfortably ideologically fit with, and that looks at the world the same way you do. And I think that, so the most popular person would be somebody that's libertarian on their in the Republican Party today, would be libertarian in their views on the government. They would be obviously individual rights. They'd be social conservative or libertarian on that too. Their foreign policies, they would be more open borders, more comfortable with that. They wouldn't care as much. And then on the socially, they'd be okay with like unions or whatever. I mean, like, and this person probably exists and exists quite a bit out there, but isn't being captured by the normal, by any person in our political, in the Republican Party right now. Who would you say
nobody's presently
that category, right? With the majority of people, how they would feel, But the thing is like, I made these up based on my knowledge, right? I didn't go look up who's the percentage of people that consider themselves because these don't exist yet, right? So
right,
if this,
you almost need to get this to a research group to see if they can kind of work on this.
Yeah, it needs actual hard data, because this is just my hunch, but I don't think it's that far off. And as I was explaining it through, you guys didn't throw a whole bunch of like, you're wrong here. No, that can't be. It's got to be more. Maybe we could, I'd say plus or minus 8 or 9 percentage points, but I don't think I'm that far off in general. I think I could be a little bit off, but I don't think I'm that far off. But I think that this is helpful to understand. So where would you guys find yourself? I'll go first. I would identify as a populist or a social con in this dial. This dial, I'd probably give myself establishment. If I'm being real, I'm fairly moderate, fairly trusting in the government. I know that's bad, but I am. I think more than maybe I should be. Maybe I should be more. I don't know. Foreign relations, I'd give myself, populist grade here. I'm pretty protectionist. And then social contract, I'd say core plus. I think that we, can do more than we are doing. And I think, but I don't think the government needs to be operating every single, area of our lives and doing, as many things as like maybe a democratic socialist would say. So, I'd give myself a fairly moderate grade right there. So that would be me. I'd be boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that'd be me. What do you guys?
I would be pretty close. I would change on the social contract. I would go down to core, but I would use something that I've learned from medicine, and this is something you're familiar with. It's called evidence-based medicine, right? You don't just make a prescription and then hope that it works. You collect evidence and you find out for over this number of people that I prescribed this to, how has it actually fared, right? And that's how we do medicine. We try to base our medical decisions off of evidence we can point to, right? And I think that when we've done that with the core plus approach, what has happened is that we've implemented a lot of systems that have done literally the opposite. The evidence is in, but we've ignored the evidence because we were quite attached to it. So maybe I would say some of the programs that we're doing in core plus right now need to be completely reworked and then towards the goal of getting rid of the majority of them. So yeah.
Well, I think you'd pretty much fall pretty neatly into the social con.
Yeah, pretty close.
Pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. Although
I don't know
with
how
open borders,
are you more protectionist, or are you more neutral, or are you all the way down here or up here? Where are you on that metric? That's I'm not sure.
Interesting. It's interesting too. So foreign relations, like the Republican Party has been for open trade, which comes close to the open borders.
Free trade, yeah.
Yeah, free trade. But we become much less free trade at this point. Libertarians and populists are reflecting that, right?
Right.
But I feel like with free trade, we also need to take an evidence-based approach. There needs to be basically justification for continuing to do what we do. Sometimes you do have to do something because we don't have any data. So you have to do something, collect the data, and then decide whether to continue doing it. But it should have evidence to do it. And as far as immigration goes, I don't think that there's any reason to keep the numbers so arbitrarily low as they have been. There maybe there needs to be caps in certain areas. Like let's say the border towns, they're getting overrun in Texas, right? So we allow people in, we allow a reasonable amount of restrictions on them, such as, background checks and things like that. And then if the border cities are full, they can't go to the border cities. They have to move further, and we'll get them there, It's like move them to Chicago, move them to Martha's Vineyard, let them go where let them go where work is.
Yeah. I think
I'd
put you in the populist category on that one, but social con.
Yeah.
Dad,
I would say probably.
How do you feel? Where do you think you?
Well, I'm similar. I'm not libertarian as far as limited authoritarian government. I believe we need government.
So you might be in the middle here.
Republic. Probably
Full
more
republic.
to republic. Yeah, full on republic. Yeah.
Okay.
So the social con, I guess, or populist, either one.
Yeah.
Individual rights. Yeah, not quite libertarian either. More the right to vote. I think you have to it has to be on the table as far as revolts and things, but most things are should be handled 99.9% of the time you want it to be done
decently and in order.
Yeah, decently in order. You want to do it through voting, but I think we ought to exercise our rights there. And I think there's some ways that we vote in some states that harm us. I mean, if you're not a Republican, you shouldn't be able to vote in the Republican pre-election type things, primaries.
Yeah.
So there's a few things there. Foreign relations, I think we need to be involved in foreign relations, not open borders. Protectionist, I guess, would be the area, I would say. I believe in nationalism, that we in a correct sense, not Nazi German nationalism, but but normal nationalism, where you try to
put your mask on,
create
help your neighbor, right?
Yeah. So you try to be a good neighbor, and you join forces together with your neighbor for the good of everybody. So, and a government, I think, should be in the area of protecting us. And then social contract, a core, not quite core plus, but core. The basic things with some more, but I'm always concerned when we have a education the federal government getting involved with education, with medicine, various things. There's a number of things that I feel like
The
government does
difficulty,
poorly,
the difficulty is
unfortunately, in
determining.
worldview.
The difficulty is determining what is core and what is core plus. So, for instance, like, is regulating pollution a core function, or is it a core plus?
I think this is
Is
somewhat how you see yourself. How do you see yourself? And are you comfortable with what point do you draw the
That's
line?
fair.
And so there's no, and I think it's okay to change, and I think it's okay to say that I define it this way, so I put my, I think
Yeah.
that's okay, and I think that's the nuance of, and it might be like the way, again, I think about it like a song, right? So if you're listening to a certain type of song, you might want the bass up on that song, right? And you listen to another song or another set of issues, right? So take example, uh immigration versus trade, right? Immigration is one song, so your setting on your foreign relations might be this way, but on trade it might be this way. You can have some nuance, you can look at things differently, but you're picking a zone. You're picking a zone that you're comfortable with. And I think that basically the point is I don't think people fit nicely into these categories. That's why I quantified and broke it out. And the point is, to me, the main takeaway of all this should be like, it's okay to have a distinct view on all these things.
And I try to use the example of school. You could do the same thing with OSHA. I believe in protecting people, workers, and things like that. But OSHA can be a
Mismanaged.
bureaucracy with depending on who's in charge, even locally, can be where there's no due process
Right.
for things. And so there's a whole bunch of things that are run by bureaucracies. Some bureaucracies do a great job and you don't even know they exist. They're in the background, they take care of things that we feel like the government should. And then there's other times where you have these like bizarre rules that come about because somebody's lost their mind, you know and thinks that it's their job to do certain things that you know who gave them that right. Well, they're
They
just
did.
making it up. It's just kind of like the president does executive orders and things where suddenly you have affirmative action by an executive order, and uh, it's well intended, but then it's gotten out of hand, type thing.
Yeah.
So
No, I think it's all good. I don't know why that reminded me of, okay, so I made this little picture right here, and I
Ooh, it's a
forgot
frog.
helpful. So this would be the government, this would be you, this would be what the government does, how you interact with the government, right? And this would be foreign relations. So it's how the government and what it does and how it interacts with the world around us. So it's sort of a visualization of these dials as well. So just wanted to
and we're all frogs about to get cooked. No.
He's smiling. Anyway.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So let's go to the Democrats and see if we can analyze. All right, so we lost Dad or Mark because of scheduling, conflicts, which is fine. He's gonna have to live his life and do his things, but we're gonna carry on and do the Democrats now, Democratic Party now. So this will be fun. So here we go. Same again, all these dials stay the same, between each one of them. For some reason, Open Borders runs into neoliberals here, but let me describe the different ones, right? So you have your neoliberals. That would be kind of your almost Democrat equivalent to what we call establishment, right? So these are establishment Democrats. You might call them blue dog Democrats. You might call them neoliberals. You might call them establishment, whatever. Yeah, but you kind of
So
get.
would President Biden be neoliberal then? Because I would think of him as establishment, but I would think of him not being new liberal, neo.
Yes, he would be neoliberal. That would be
Okay.
most people would call him that on the Democratic side. Call him a neoliberal. Okay, and then you have a liberal, which I would almost call classical liberal, or they might call themselves classically liberal sometimes. These would be like your, if Dave Rubin had stayed on the Democratic Party, this would be a lot of your professors at colleges, a lot of intellectual people that, are in the Democratic Party and like intellectually agree with a lot of the party.
Jon Stewart.
Yeah, your Jon Stewarts, those type of people. A lot of people maybe in the press are between liberal and neoliberal here. You kind of, yeah, I think you get it there. Democratic Socialist, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. That's like a Bernie Sanders. Yeah, I was blanking.
Well, what about populists? I'm kind of on the fence between him being that.
We'll get into it. Populists and Democratic Socialists are basically the difference between libertarian wing versus the populist wing, in the Democrats. In the Republican side, you have these like nuanced differences here, and that we'll get to as we go through a little bit here. So a neoliberal and liberal are going to kind of have this like neutral or whatever, like very, what's it called? Democracy. These are people on the news that are, constantly talking about democracy. The Democratic Party is mostly in this camp. I gave 55%. Does that equal 100? That doesn't look right. Why doesn't it give me my adding up? Oh yeah, because I'm not in Excel. Oh well.
It is 100.
That is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Okay. I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I checked my math. Anyway, some reason it didn't look like 100%. But okay, so and
I see why, but I can explain it.
Right. Your Democratic Socialist would be much more state, comfortable with the state running things, and a populist might be kind of more like in the middle there, a little bit more Republican in that sense, in that vein. Then you have individual rights and the right to revolt. You have, your neoliberals and your Democratic Socialists about at the same level here. Liberals a little bit higher, and your populists would be more like Bernie Sanders. He actually believes in the Second Amendment, in the right to vote. I mean, sorry, not obviously in the right to vote, but like the Second Amendment, and so even a Democratic Socialist, kind of the most popular Democratic Socialist in America, goes into this category on this dial. But I think this would be more like AOC style Democratic Socialism,
versus Bernie.
versus Bernie. Just that would be the difference. Democratic Socialist would be just like the epitome of Bernie Sanders, except for this one would kind of fall into AOC category or territory here.
Right.
Whereas Bernie Sanders might be a little bit more populist, and a little bit more traditional in this vein. Whereas you have your liberals, are a little bit more traditional in this vein as well, where these are the people that are calling for, gun rights or take away the Second Amendment, thing there as well. So let's check our percentages and see if that tracks well with things like the Second Amendment, neoliberal. So lots of people are in this camp, but for different reasons, right?
Oh yeah.
50%. So their party is split pretty 50-50 percent on that. And then you have a pretty fair number, I think about 20%, that are still Second Amendment, within the Democratic Party there. Kind of gives them that diversity. And then the foreign relations, you got your neoliberals are very open borders, very globalist, and your Democratic Socialist here, but you still have, your.
I feel like neoliberal would go all the way to globalist as a rule. Most of them are comfortable with that.
I think I need to back this down to protectionist, because you have your like Elizabeth Warrens and Bernie Sanders that are in the kind of almost that populist wing too. I mean, like Bernie Sanders is kind of in between these sometimes, so you have your variations in the Democratic Party here as well. And I think that's what I'm illustrate here is there's
But I
just
think most neoliberals are actually okay with globalist policy. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
You say
It's
liberals or
just my
neoliberals?
sense. Neoliberals.
Yeah, yeah. And these are your establishments types. These are your news hosts, a lot of them,
Mhm.
MSNBC, CNN,
Yeah.
but you have your percentage here of normies, you know, um, I'd say 25 to plus 20, I mean 15 plus 21% or whatever, you got your 37-ish, 36%, the population that's, in this, um, you know, not for this open borders thing, and that's not a significant amount. That's why you have a lot of, push for, the policies you have on the Democratic side. I think that explains a little bit of that, policy push there. There's a lot more consensus in the Democratic Party right now, around a lot of issues. And I think that because ideologically there's not as much diversity, but there is still diversity. There's still fights in the Democratic Party. And I think, what'd you have, 16 candidates when last time too? I mean, you had a bunch of candidates
That's
on both
only
sides.
that's only when we allow actual debates. But anyways.
Yeah. And then social contract. I mean, you have a lot of neoliberal people like that don't want more. I mean, Biden even voted against expansion of Social Security, years ago. And there's still a lot of like the Joe Manchins and, whatever, they just want to keep the government to these core functions, but you have a large part of the party that, your AOCs and stuff that want the government to do a lot more, and you have a populace that wants government operated. I mean, you got a lot of people in these camps. Um, you know, uh, Here you'd have 25, 35% of the party, up here, wanting these things.
Way up there.
And 50%, is in this core plus, so 50% plus 35. I mean, they're very outnumbered. There's only 15% in this, small
That actually want, small government.
So, or the government to do. They want the government small, but the things that they want the government to do is also limited. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good way to think about that. So yeah, we went a lot faster than the Democrats. I think I need a Democrat on this channel to help me to dissect a lot of these things because I don't necessarily identify as Democrat, so I can't. It's hard to draw the nuances out as much and debate the nuances. It's like because I kind of almost have to like just go off of what I know, which I might not think about the issues in the same way as Democrats do. So, but yeah.
Interestingly, I feel like I could come close to identifying as a liberal on these dials.
That's the beauty of it. It's like you might be a little bit higher here, and you might be, a liberal in this area here, maybe a little bit more. And and that's the point of it. It goes back to like we're not that far away from each other. It's just nuances, and I think that's important to recognize. And I think
then particular policies that you can arrive at different answers, even though you're coming from the same kind of place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
if you can debate them, you actually might be able to have some chance of bringing people to a good consensus. But if you can't, if you cut off free speech, it really doesn't allow it. And that can be either cutting off free speech by censorship or self-censorship. So certain things are so politically incorrect that if somebody says it, then other people shut them down, so then they have to self-censor. So either one is dangerous. Should be able to speak what you believe.
I think what's also important is like that 40% of people that don't vote still have very similar ideologies that map onto this, but because there isn't the nuance, they don't find a place. I think an interesting thought that I thought about today is you almost could have 8 different parties, 4 Republican, Democratic parties and 4 Republican parties, and you'd have about 26% of the population or of Congress. Well, I guess you'd have to divide these in half because, you know, you got 50% on each side. But, you know, you divide these out. So you've got, you know,
what would get done? First of all, it'd be a little chaotic, but it would be
well,
actually what the people of America want for a change.
well, coalitions. I mean, you have these people would vote with these people on certain issues, you know,
Yeah.
and if you can get the populist, the democratic socialist, and the neoliberals to vote with you on a certain specific issue, you can get something done within the democratic side and build a coalition and build a consensus and move things through. I think what's bad is people don't like being pigeonholed, and I think a lot of people don't like being called a liberal or, you know, a socialist, you know, or, you know, the different terms that get thrown around, and they don't feel like they have a home when ideologically they map somewhere in the Democratic Party. They just don't know how to identify themselves, you know, and I think that's true of the Republican Party. I think you got a lot of people that are like, I mean, I took the political compass in college and it said I was a libertarian. I didn't a single thing on this libertarian except for individual rights, but all the questions were just size of government, size and scope of government. And so I became a libertarian. And I'm like, take in the whole rest of the picture. I mean, it didn't distinguish from protectionist and isolationist. So when I answered those questions, it just threw me into a liberal. You know, it was like, and I did make questions. I felt like the government was responsible for some things, but my weighted responses were just so much into this liberal camp, libertarian camp, that I couldn't get out of it, you know? And all the questions on the Democratic side, I mean, you answer the questions too much about you want the government to do this and that, whatever, and all of a sudden it tells you you're a liberal. And so these kids go out of college thinking they're liberal when they're actually probably a social con, you know? and it's like, but that didn't map anywhere on their, you know, on the political compass, and it became worthless and confusing. The compass is a terrible tool to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I think this adds up so much nuance and definition, and you're able to find yourself. I think anybody would be able to find themselves in here somewhere, whether Democrat or Republican. You know, I think a Democrat could look on here and find themselves. I really would like to refine this a little bit more by getting a Democratic friend to look at it and talk through it and talk it out. I really want to get Paul on here and debate libertarianism, because I think it's so, I mean, the biggest, most drastic difference between everybody else and libertarians, you know, and yet how much of the party, 35%, they're the largest grip on the party, you know, largest faction is really the libertarians, but they go either way. You know? And you can't figure out what to do with them. You know what I mean? Libertarians are
they get pulled different directions. They don't have usually have a leader
of the Democratic Party, you know, like these guys up here, they don't know what to do with these guys, you know, and the populist group is there. It's present. It's actually probably bigger than the Democratic Socialists, but they don't get any representation, you know? So, you know, the Warrens, AOCs, and Bernie, you know, are kind of splitting the vote here or whatever, or ideologically actually fairly diverse on this side. So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's helpful. I think it's informative. And I think that's going to be all for this episode.
Yeah. Oh, for the uninitiated, what is this political compass that you're referring to, and how big is it as far as like how wide is it used?
So if you type into Google right now, how to find out if I'm a Democrat or Republican, it will come up. It is the tool. It's the go-to tool for political ideology. It's and again, for the uninitiative, if you don't know what it is, there's the X and Y axis, and they cross in the middle. And if you are a and it gives you like a quadrant. So you go through a number of questions, and depending on how you answer the
maybe a little
question,
both.
it puts your dot into one of these quadrants, because the north and south quadrant, or vertical, horizontal, no, vertical. Yeah, vertical axis is like authoritarian. It's basically, do you think the government should be big or small, right? And then
Right.
the vertical axis is like social questions. Do you think the government should be doing this, or the government shouldn't be doing this? So it's kind of like it's asking these two questions here in different ways, and that's all it's doing. And it maybe it
Got
gets a
it.
little bit of this and a little bit of this, but it maps it onto this like
But
quadrants where it just
yeah,
it isn't helpful to me.
I
Um,
see.
to
Cool.
It isn't accurate to me, because it doesn't capture all the nuance that I think this does. So I would love to make a pitch right here. If you're watching this and you have some input, I'd love it. If you're a Democrat and you want to talk, send me a message. Maybe we can get you on the channel, and talk through some of
That'd
these
be
things.
cool.
That'd be neat. Love to have some diversity on the channel. Always open to hearing, some different ideas as well. And honestly, really want to get this book written and put out. And I'd like to make a website too, where you could go through and answer these questions, and it would move your dial up or down in each category, so you could actually come away with a result, right?
Be done.
And yeah, so like maybe this would be 1 through 10. So, you'd get a score of 6.5. Okay, I'm right in this area, on the LAG, limited authoritarian government, and then your IRR, individual rights and revolts, you might get a, 6 or 5 or something, and so you get a result at the end of it, and you're like, okay, that's where I map. And I approximately am in, the group. I agree with about this many percentage of whatever, And so, kind of
Cool.
help. That would be interesting to do. I'd love to make that website. So anyway, I think that's it for this episode. Matt, do you have any parting words?
Yeah, thanks for watching. I definitely have learned, or at least given myself a little bit better of a tool, and I hope that you have also given yourselves a better tool for understanding where you are on the political spectrum, and for being able to relate to other people. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, political dials. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Oh, stop share. How do I stop the recording? I don't know what I'm doing.
Why do you say